Nice seeing you. I think we are on now. It's recording.
Okay, great. And just one last question. This is gonna take like an hour, right?
About an hour.
Okay.
Maybe a little bit more. Tina, shall we start? Shall I start? Shall you start? Okay, maybe I'll just welcome everybody. Usually Tina is the one who does that, but I'm allowing myself to do it this time. So welcome everybody. Welcome Patrick. We have a special guest here. I'll introduce him in a second. Maybe just to say that this is our fourth session this time of a round of discussions, of conscious discussions with very special friends who are giving themselves to us. They're donating their time and energy to telling us how they get to live conscious lives. This is an initiative of Tsemba Life, Tina's enterprise, and Tree of Life, which is my own. And we have these conversations once in Portuguese and once in English so that we are able to reach as many people as we can, our friends, our relatives, our clients, our acquaintances, and we're looking forward to the discussion today. So over to you, Tina. I don't know what you'd like to say before we get into it.
Yeah, thank you so much, Akshar, and Patrick, again, thank you for saying yes. We've been hunting you for some time because we really, according to Akshar, who knows you better than I do, you're really the right person for us to have this conversation on the topic of paternity and masculinities. So I'm going to first introduce Patrick to everyone. So Patrick Munyaneza was born in Kigali, in Rwanda, due to the horrific genocide that took place in 1994, I believe, and the war in the Congo. Him and his family had to relocate. They first went through various countries in the continent until they finally landed in Maputo, where they were welcomed for over 20 years. Part of his family is still in Mozambique. He now lives in Grenada, which is a small island in the Caribbean, with his family, and works for the United Nations there. Patrick is a dreamer. He's an avid learner, and we are so grateful that just the fact that you're open to have this conversation is for us a testimony that you are a true learner of life and you're allowing yourself to have these kinds of challenging conversations. He loves pushing himself to limits. He believes everything is possible if one sets one's mindset to it. He has always been drawn to the idea of exploring his own existence and being alert about himself. He believes in the power of the mind. He's a father of two. He's a brother, a friend, a son, and a partner. In his spare time, he loves to run long distances, reading and meditating. It was so interesting when you sent the picture today. I couldn't relate because I don't run. I was like, oh my God, I feel so bad. You look so excited about what you were doing. But thank you so much again for joining us today. I know it's early for you guys. It's almost late for us in this part of the continent. Yes, and I'm just, I'm really excited about the topic, about this conversation, because I'm a mother of boys. And for me, it's often challenging to find the right footing and the right type of guidance, for my boys, because we live in a society that is patriarchal, and the force and the energy and the guidance, I would say, of the patriarchy in Mozambique is very, it's so subtle because it's everywhere. It's led by women, it's led by men. So you don't really know, you can't really say that men are pushing for patriarchy because everyone lives in it, operates through it. And it's often for me a challenge to know how far can I go in teaching my boys attitudes and behaviors that are more inclusive when they live in a very masculine society, and so thank you so much for allowing yourself to have this conversation. I know that you're also a parent, and so I wanted to probably start from the beginning and hear from you. What was your experience of paternity, the role of fathers, the role of men in your childhood?
Thank you, Tina, for having me. I think that was an easy hunt, right? I mean, like an easy prey. I know that Akshar, he wanted to have this conversation a while ago, and I'm really, really happy to be here and share not my learnings. I'm still learning, we still, I think, as I mentioned, like I'm an avid learner. I think like until the end of my life, I'll be learning. So yeah, about fatherhood, like my experience with fatherhood, we come like what you described about Mozambican society, and it's basically like similar to Rwanda's society, like this macho culture, which is really deeply embedded like in our culture, and we cannot dissociate with it. And what I mentioned in the beginning as well, the whole idea is to be a little bit alert and see what is harmful and what you have learned, I have learned before being a parent, and what I want to pass on to my kids. So I think it started even before I thought about being a parent. I was looking around me, things that they were dysfunctional, like to my essence, if I can say that, like, started questioning things like, for instance, it's interesting, like I have my father as a hero for me because of, my whole history, the past that you just described. But for instance, I will ask myself, like, why I don't hug quite often, like my dad. My dad passed like 15 years ago, and I can count on my hand how many times we did have like a hug. It doesn't mean that the love was not there. It's just the way to express it that was maybe absent. So you start asking these kind of questions as well, as the society as well is evolving. We are the old traditional, for instance, household division of labor are somehow being demolished. And how do we live in this new kind of society, this evolving society where the roles a little bit are changing over time? So it starts always about questioning that, like, what is who am I? Trying to find like my identity and what that means in my everyday, how I relate to the world, how I relate to my colleagues, how I relate to my brother, my friends, as an individual. How do I relate to my partner, to my mother, to my, to everything that surrounds me. So this is the kind of like questions that you start like posing to yourself, and you start trying to find answers and how your identity and what you really would like to change in your life. And I think I was having a conversation a few days ago with a friend of mine, and we're talking exactly about that, like how parenthood is a catalytic to our own development as human beings, because you start to be more alert. It's not the only way for personal development, I think, but I think parenthood is a huge push for you to go deep inside it, to look in every corner, to see what you want to pass, particularly what you want to pass on to your kids, and how you want to connect to your kids, and learn a little bit like from your past or your own experience. We are all beings of experience. We are made of our experience. You want to go back and look what happened to you in your childhood, how you related to your friends, your family, your father, your mother, and how you would like to see, or what you want to pass on to your kids, what you don't want to, and what you want to question, and where you can find answer, and start being open about it and talk to your people who are surrounding you. Yeah, so after this, maybe I'll pass to you.
Yeah.
So I'm intrigued now because my next question would be, did anything motivate you to start asking those questions? And I ask that because it seems to me that many people, a great many people, don't feel the need to ask any questions, especially men in our society, because my impression is that things tend to work out better for men in terms of opportunities, in terms of all sorts of privileges. So if you're being already privileged as a man, for example, I see that for many men, there's no need to start questioning. Why question things that are already working out, or at least they seem to be working out? So maybe you've already answered in a way. Was it the moment you knew you were going to become a father that motivated you to start asking questions? Or did it already start before that? And maybe your fatherhood, your parenthood was the bigger catalyst, as you said?
No, as I mentioned, Aksha, it started like way before. I was always like asking questions to myself, maybe not sharing with like, maybe I started sharing like a little bit later, but from my side, because I was surrounded by women, you know, I was raised by an amazing woman. And I will ask myself, like, for instance, I will know this is something that you see. Of course, what you just mentioned, maybe like for us, man, it's a little bit like more difficult to question because it's a position of privilege, and mostly like people don't want to lose that privilege, right? Like if you have a privilege, you don't give it away like easily. As you mentioned, things apparently work. So why change? I think that's the mindset of many. Why change like a system that is already working? Apparently working, but exactly, we all know that it doesn't. So it all started, for instance, looking at how I was being treated. I have a sister, we are just 1 year apart, and how I was being treated like in outside, particularly outside of our home, because I was a boy, I was a boy, you know, and she was being treated differently. She's an amazing woman. She's intelligent, but, you know, I think she's way more intelligent than I am. But, you know, I was being treated differently, and I'll ask myself, why this? My mom as well, which is a very amazing woman as well, but like within our social cycles, she was having like a different treatment, mostly because she was a woman. You know, like the Mozambican society, for instance, one thing that strikes me always will be the fact that, for instance, in some social events, my mom couldn't sit, like, for instance, with men. That's, I will, you know, and probably sometimes she was the brightest, like, mind in the room, but she has to go sit with, well, they had their own corner, like the women corner, and the men would be, and it was like being, you know, the tale of two cities, you know, living like in two worlds, like one for women and one for men, and why we couldn't like be all together and having, like, for instance, a meaningful conversation, connect, and being treated like as equals. So this was like basically where I started like questioning this, and you can see this mostly like everywhere, like even in public institutions, you know. I was raised in a neighborhood, for instance, where gender-based violence was a huge issue. So, and this was not something that, you know, it was basically normalized. You know, even like within institutions, you know, we'll have, like, for instance, a neighbor taking her to the police station. When we get to the police station, she's the one being questioned, as she was like the criminal, but she, you know, she was physically abused. So this is the kind of things that came to me before being a parent. And I think, as I mentioned, parenthood catalyzes like everything. Like, now you have to be, I'm a father of 2 boys, just like you, Tina. And you want to how you want them to be, like what kind of grown-ups you want them to be, and what do you want to teach them at a very early age. I believe like we all start like at a very early age. What from me, I don't want to pass on that maybe like in the future it will harm them or make them harm others. So I think like fatherhood was like more like the biggest push that I had, but it all started like way before.
Yeah, I wanted to touch a little bit on what you spoke about also. When you spoke about the experience with your father, you did mention that your father was like a hero to you. My father was also a hero for me. And this expression of emotions and, hugging and all of that. I remember that I grew up in a home where we were allowed to kiss my dad, on the cheek. But that was as far as we could go. I mean, I think my father was really an amazing person, but he was mostly absent emotionally. And so I wanted to touch a little bit on this issue of emotions and expressions of emotion. I find it so interesting that when we're having conversations about men, especially in the world of women, women will say, oh, men don't, they don't have emotions. They don't have emotions. They don't feel anything. They're just too mean or they're just too silent and all of that. And we are unable to connect that to how boys are raised. I see very often, like when my boys express their emotions, how everyone around them will react, and how my mother will say, boys don't cry. Why are you crying? Or any other person of a certain generation reaffirming the idea that a boy should not cry or express his emotions and all of that. And how that then affects how these men, how men develop their sense of and their ability to self-regulate their emotions, be able to express what they're feeling, and really tell the world and whoever is around them that this makes me feel this or that way, is often seen as a weakness. But yet at the same time, when it comes to difficult situations in relationships, between friends, at work, whatever, the complaint is that men don't have feelings. Do you see the contradiction? So what do you think about that? And Akshara, I would also want to hear your opinion about this.
Yeah, that's I think that's like a big issue. Men, we have emotions, just like
any other human being.
Exactly, we are human beings. Like, I think that's the primary description of human being. Like, we are beings of emotions. So we have, and the thing is, particularly those emotions that are associated like with particularly the negative emotions, those horrible emotions, resentment, when you feel vulnerable, like loneliness. Positive emotions, we tend to share them like quite easily, as men, like, but the negative emotions are always have, at least like from my experience, always associated like with weakness, because there is this widely accepted idea that a strong man will be the one who doesn't cry, who doesn't he doesn't show his emotions like in public, it's like, you're not a feeling, like a robot, right? And I think like from a little bit that there is a little bit of change now, because I think like these horrible, particularly the horrible emotions, the negative emotions, once you keep themselves to you keep those emotions to yourself, at a certain point, it becomes like a huge issue. There is a say that say like omitting like these horrible emotions, it will lead to some kind of a disaster ahead of you. But yeah, there is this widely accepted idea, which is a social construct, that strong men don't show their emotions. And this comes, as you mentioned, you gave an example to your dad, there was a limit where you could connect with him, you know, and from there, like maybe she'll say, like, go talk to your mom, you know. And you create, and it all starts at home. I mentioned like this relation, how we connect to our kids. And this is, for instance, it will be the same when he, you know, this kid or a child, how he will connect to his friends, particularly male friends. It was very interesting for me because when I started sharing my emotions, it was very easier for me to share them with women, you know, with many, because this is something that you'll get like from my dad. If there was something vulnerable, when I was showing myself vulnerable, he said like, oh, go talk to your mom. And that's where, so it was easier for me to relate to women when it comes to sharing emotions, which is still a big deal for me to share my emotions. But I think like this is a social construct, and then something that we can work on.
Yeah.
So turn to you maybe to share your.
I completely agree with what you're saying. For me, all of the things that of men not feeling, they're a social construct. Now, as a man, I can attest that I have feelings, that I have emotions very often. But I can also attest that I've learned to mask them very, very well and very easily. Yeah? Which is not something I'm saying with pride. It's just how it turned out to be, which is something that I always, with my work now, with my personal spiritual work, I'm trying to undo some of those things. And also sharing a little bit of my personal history. I think partly I've been saved because I was raised by women only, women and girls, and something that would be criticized by others, but to me, that's something that helped me enrich my experience as a person, as a human, because I've had access to women feeling, expressing, being themselves in my presence. And of course, I was influenced by that. And because of that, I'm more able to accept my emotions, my insecurities, my fears, all of those things that we are taught not to accept. On the other hand, I've trained so hard, for example, not to cry, because I also grew up hearing that men don't cry, boys don't cry, that up to this date, it's difficult for me to cry when I'm going through a bad time. I get to do that, but I have to help it. I have to, I don't know, do some sort of breathing technique, some sort of use some sort of tool to put myself in a place where I feel, I don't know, safe enough to just express. And when it's happening, then the tears follow as well. So I would say that those beliefs and that boys don't cry, that we all learned, and that we still, to a great deal, that we reproduce, they are a great disservice to humanity, because half of humanity is prevented from crying naturally. And because of that, we tend to deal with our emotions in a very toxic way, in a way that harms us more and harms others more. And unfortunately, as far as I can see, as far as the statistics tell, the ones that are harmed the most are women and children, even though men harm themselves a lot as well, unconsciously. And luckily, as Patrick said, things seem to be changing now. Not as fast as I'd wish them to change, but I think those changes are coming, where we see that men are finally understanding that apart from, because anger is something that is allowed to men. That's why we see men acting out, blowing up, being violent. And then we say, okay, boys will be boys. That's what boys do. That's what men do. So anger has been allowed for a long time in the masculine realm. But now, slowly, I feel like we are allowing ourselves, and we are allowing men in general to question. Like you said, I think the key to what you were saying, Patrick, is when you start questioning. People tell me that I can't cry, but why? Why not? and what happens if I do cry, and so on. But yeah, I don't want to extend myself so much.
I love what you both are sharing, and I think these conversations are so necessary. I hope this specific conversation reaches a lot of people, because what I find that creates a lot of confusion, I would say, for lack of a better word, is this expectation. It's like, on the one hand, from the world of women, I'll talk from the world of women. On the one hand, we want men to be able to connect, and I see you spoke about human connection on the board. We want to be able to connect on the human level with men, but at the same time, we want them to be strong and not express certain types of emotions. Otherwise, we will start perceiving them as weak, as unable to, and so it's so important for us to have these conversations and even introduce these kinds of conversations in schools, in the families, where we teach both men and women, both girls and boys, how to express their emotions in ways that are supportive to them and supportive to those that are listening, and without having to push to be heard. Because that's one of the things. I was having a conversation today with someone who said that and it was a man, and he said, because my mom doesn't listen to me, I tend to be aggressive when I speak, and my wife is teaching me that I don't need to shout and scream when I want to express how I'm feeling. I can actually just say, whatever you did made me feel sad, or, the way you are treating me is making me feel this or that way. So we think that there's a confusion. Michael, the confusion is about expressing how we feel. We think that when people express how they feel, they're showing weakness, especially men. But when we share how we feel, we're actually teaching people how to relate to us and how to connect with us, and very often, I think that this idea that men should not show their emotions, should not share how they feel, is a way to protect them, is actually creating more damage, like you're saying. And evidently, it's what we are seeing. I would love to agree with you, both of you, when you say that things are changing, but I work throughout this whole country. I work in institutes of teacher training for one of our clients, and unfortunately, that continues to be the narrative.
Yes.
That continues to be the narrative in spaces where we require faster change. That continues to be the narrative of don't show emotion, a man should be strong. A woman who is raped, it's probably her fault. What was she wearing? She provoked him. What did she do for him to beat her up? So all these things are still normalized, in the majority of this country and probably in the majority of places in the world. So I wanted to hear also, Patrick, how do you then navigate this world, and how do you stand up for your own beliefs and your own, your beliefs and your principles in a world where you're often challenged by other men who want to continue with the status quo? And you were talking a little bit about that, about whether or not to let go of the advantage or the privileges, and that. How do you navigate that, and how do you continue to stand up for yourself and for your principles in a world that is continuously challenging that?
Yeah. Tina, and before just going to your point, I want to go maybe take a step back and talk a little bit about being strong. Whole idea of being strong, not only for men, but for women as well. There is maybe a misconception, this is just my view, that being vulnerable, it's the extreme opposite of being strong, okay? And we, as human beings, I think we are the most vulnerable beings on the planet. If you look what surrounds you, we are the most vulnerable beings. So being vulnerable, it's part of our essence, okay? Maybe sometimes our ego will make us think we are superhumans. No, we are the most vulnerable beings on the planet. If you look at in the animal kingdom, you know, for instance, I don't know, a lion just, you know, give a birth and then, you know, you see the little lion like running around. So we need care, you know, we are the most vulnerable to disease. You know, COVID almost like wiped out all of like from this. So we are super vulnerable. And for me, being vulnerable, it doesn't mean that you are weak. You know, you can be very strong and be vulnerable at the same time. They're not like opposites. It's maybe probably talking about the strength. It's probably how you equip yourself with tools that will make you navigate through the most like complicated times, the times that makes us cry, you know, the times that bring us resentment, the times that require forgiveness. So equip yourself to navigate through those hardships. I think it's what will make you strong or weak, not being vulnerable. So now going back to your question about how do I navigate in a world, maybe sometimes which you don't identify yourself. The thing is, I believe I believe in small steps, you know, being, for instance, being a parent. I don't know if I mentioned that, but for instance, I was a home dad for 2 years. So I took care of my first boy, basically when he was 3 weeks, you know. I stayed at home with him since he was like 3 weeks. What I learned from that, it's most of what mostly we call like toxic masculinities. They don't only come from men, you know, most of them, they come from women as well. I learned to navigate like into women's space. So there is a lot of misconceptions as well in women's space. For instance, I will be the only one taking my kid for shots. And the first question I will get from everyone, which is, if you go to the
clinics, the health clinic, yeah.
The health clinic, it's a woman's space. So I was there with a young boy, like with like probably like 4 months. And the first question that I will get always is, where is the mom? Where is the mother? What time she's coming? Like, do you understand what we are telling you? Like, for instance, I had that question, like, do you understand that what we are telling you? You know, I think just like being able to talk about it, for instance, saying like, you will see me here often. So I'm the primary caregiver. So I have to take notes what you're telling me. I have to go and communicate with the mother. So I will be the primary caregiver here. And after some time, that's why I believe in small steps. It was a shock, for instance, in the first like 2 visits that I had there. But after that, it was, you know, they were talking to me, asking me questions like how it was. And sometimes, like, for instance, I had a lot on, for instance, accident happened with kids. You are a mother, you know, something will happen, you have a kid that will, you know, harm themselves. That's our job, try to make them not harm themselves. And it's instantly take us, me being a responsible like dad, you know, for instance, we were crying, the baby crying, where is the mom to make the baby cry? I was the one having to make the baby cry. And going back as well to how do I relate, for instance, to my friends who are still like, for instance, having, for instance, difficulties in sharing. I think, first of all, like, we need role models in our societies, you know, particularly in Mozambique. We need men that you can see, and I want to relate to this, but this is my role model. I want to talk what he says. I want to do what he does. And I think, and sharing our experiences, you know, you mentioned about when we started here, like, let's have a conversation as we're in a coffee shop. When we go to a coffee shop, when we go to the bar Friday night, TGIF, after work, when men usually sit, let's talk about like meaningful conversation, not only about football and politics and all those typical, traditional issues that men will be talking about. Let's talk, for instance, about raising, be more connecting to our kids. I always encourage my friends, your young kids at young age, first weeks, first months, go out alone with them, go somewhere, like spend like 3 hours, only you and your kids somewhere. So, and sharing as well, as you mentioned, sharing our insecurities, calling a friend and telling him, this is happening and I'm quite insecure, I'm scared, I don't know what to do. And, starting this kind of a conversation, it will reciprocate at some point, they will come to you. I have a friend now who when he calls me, he asks me how I'm feeling. How are you? He said, how are you feeling today? And that's a kind of a change, like in our conversation. So this is the kind of, like, I think those small steps I was talking about that, and with time, I'm an optimistic. I think like with time we'll get there.
Yeah, it's so interesting what you're saying about having stayed home for 2 years. Because, as you know, in the Mozambican labor law, a man only has 1 day, it's written, 1 day after the day the child is born, you can stay home, and then the day after you come back. And so that means that the rest of the next 3 months, which are the most difficult ones, the first 3 months where the child has colic, the child doesn't sleep, the child only cries, it means that physically, I don't know emotionally, but physically, you are not available to support, that mother. And if you are both being parents for the first time, it probably means that there will be a burden on the person who stays home, because now that you have to negotiate this person has to go to work tomorrow morning, Should I wake them up to help me? I'm exhausted because I've been taking care of this child the whole day. What do you think about that? This whole thing of 1 day. For instance, you work for the UN, and the UN has 4 months, I believe now, 4 months for men. What do you think? What are your views on this 1 day, day of paternity leave?
It's, as we mentioned, like, because we're talking about how these issues are deeply embedded, like in our societies. So this is a reflection, like, most of the people who write those laws, like, they're men. So, they don't want to be maybe this is assuming they want to be part of it, 1 day to celebrate. Usually that day, maybe they're not even home. They're celebrating with their friends somewhere. So, but I think it's all a process. This is part of legislation. Legislation is man-made, we can change them. And usually they follow like the social evolution. So once we get there where we want to be, where men, for instance, say, okay, maybe I have a day, I will give up like, I don't know, 3 weeks of salary, but I want to stay at home and, be part of the first day of my child. Maybe like if there's this pressure, like over time, they will change that. That's what happened, for instance, in developed world, because man wanted to be there. I think now at this point, if you give like those 4 months, we might have like problems in that, because you might find a lot of people engaging in other activities rather than being at home and taking care. But I think it's part of an evolution. What I learned, like, from particularly early childhood, like the first days, the first weeks, the first months, the first years, they are very important to build up the human connection that I just mentioned at the beginning. So if you're not there in the first hours, in the first weeks, you are missing quite a lot. You're missing an opportunity to deeply connect with your child. I think I'm blessed because I had that opportunity. And you can see it how I relate to my kids now. It's bonds that will be there for life. There is a rule, like the first 1,000 days of a brain development, a child, the rate at which the brain develop, it will never happen like again, like in a lifetime. So the connections, the need to connect, to relate, to be close, to even things that are beyond our understanding. Holding, like for instance, the child for hours, letting the baby sleep on your chest like for hours and hours, and that bonding. It's going to be for the, I believe it's going to be for the rest of the life. So we have to give men the chance to engage in that kind of bonding at the early age.
If I may, Patrick, yeah, when I look at you, I see an oasis in the middle of the desert. You know, that your experience, like you said, in my opinion, should be more that of a role model. Like more men should be looking at you and say, "Wow, I'd like to also be able to spend the first 2 years or 1,000 days with my child." But I see that as a very rare phenomenon. I think it's, especially in our culture, it's very, very rare. And I tend to be an optimistic as well most of the time. But sometimes I'm beginning to think that maybe just individual change is not enough, because if you're 1 in 1,000, 1 in a million, I don't know, then society at large will still be something that is not healthy, you know. So I'm really brainstorming now with you and trying to see how can we bring about like more collective change, more collective approaches. I don't know, because yeah, otherwise we still be an oasis in a desert or 1 in a million, and society still is sick, if I can say it like this. Yeah, and you're talking about legislation, for example. This is something that would affect a lot of people at once, or at least more rapidly than if you change there individually, or if someone else is inspired by your example and that person changes individually. So do you have an idea, like how could we bring about like more collective movement? I don't know if Tina, of course, this is also for you, Patrick, because I think that just optimism alone, which is something that is also my approach, my view, and my small steps, sometimes seems like it's not enough. Or am I just becoming a pessimist?
Yeah, no, I totally agree with you. Like collective changes, like particularly culturally, like deep traditional like values, they are hard to change. You know, it's not going to be overnight that you will see those changes. So they will take time. And what I'm optimistic about, it's like about the small steps. Like my personal, I'm not a final product. I'm still learning a lot. I'm learning a lot. You know, I have my kid now going like in different stages of life, and I have to learn about it. I have to learn about myself. And I'm not perfect by any means. So, but I got like encouragement and support from my own friends. So for instance, this is kind of a support. I have, when I go back to Mozambique, most of when I sit around with my friends, when I go to restaurants and stuff, they starting asking me questions like, how do you do that? How do you allow yourself to spend 2 years? So they start asking questions. Like sometimes, like as I mentioned, it's role models. It's more about having experiences, sharing these experiences, raising the curiosity, and I think it will go. You know, we can like reach more people. And about the whole traditional values and how to change them, it's not going to be anyway like overnight. You know, it will take its time. But the whole idea that at least, for instance, that we are having this conversation today and we have people like joining, that's a huge step. I don't think like 20 years ago in Mozambique, in Maputo, somewhere 20, 30, 40 years ago, we'll be having this conversation. So the fact that we are doing it, it's a change. You know, we have people joining us like through Facebook, and you start having this conversation over dinners, over, you know, in different social cycles. And this is the small steps that I believe that they will bring change like in the future.
Yeah, I wanted to again touch on the topic that you mentioned, and we've been sort of, my internet actually went down for a little bit, but I'm back. Which is the topic of privileges, because when I think about this idea of 1 day of paternity leave and the fact that nobody's challenging that, it's somehow, I'm probably in a place of judgment, so forgive me, but it somehow sounds to me that it works well in response to the privilege of being able to sleep, being able to, have an excuse not to support, having an excuse not to help, because, and then you have, like you were saying, the cacophony of mothers and grandmothers and aunts and sisters who will say, you can't make your husband work, or you can't give too much work for your husband. That's not his role. He's not supposed to be carrying the child or changing diapers or taking the child to the clinic and all of that. What kind of woman are you? And all of that. I wanted to talk a little bit about that, about the privilege that it is for men to not have to do that and not be criticized,
Yeah.
Let's just talk a little bit about that.
No. I totally understand you, and I had to navigate through that as well. Yes, as I mentioned at the beginning, for instance, we are having the traditional households division of labors are kind of changing, and by those changes, we end up, it's a demolition of basically that, and with that demolition of those traditional values, there will come some kind of conflicts and confusion around them, because this comes it goes way back, for instance, from my grandparent time, where a woman was, she would stay at home and she would take care of the kids, but now she goes to work. How do we manage, for instance, the sleeping, which is a very complicated topic. And as I mentioned, as men, not only men, everyone in a position of privilege, giving up those privileges, there will be always resistance. That's why maybe you find that one only day, because this is kind of the resistance that we find within the society. But it depends on how you look at it. I think it's a privilege for me to be able to stay at home. That's why I told you, I think I was blessed to stay at home taking care of a kid for 2 years. That's a privilege. So once we start changing the way we see it, and that's where I think we start looking at change. For me, it was a privilege. I'll always tell and if you can do it, it's not always easy to do, because we still have to. We have our financial needs. We have to pay rent. All those financial responsibilities. But if someone can do that, it's a huge privilege. So once we shift the way we look at it, I think that's where the change starts. And there is something else that you mentioned as well, which is, for instance, our behavior, what we do, and we can get away with it because we don't have the lens of societies judging us. This is something that I've experienced quite a lot as well. I've been into situations where, for instance, people will look at a woman as a mother, with judgmental lens. And to me, I could get away because I was a man. He's the irresponsible, he's an irresponsible man. He shouldn't be in that position. So no one looks at it. And I think that's where is critical, because when you have judgment, this kind of negative judgments from everyone surrounding you, instead of having support, all that lack of sleeping, all that work, it exacerbates, you are putting something on the top of you, and then you start questioning yourself. So this is something that as a father, at least you don't get, if you want to put it another way, it's a privilege that we have. So, we can get away from some things we don't have like this. We have more support. I think this is something that I learned, that if you are an engaging father, you are an engaging father, you have support from, strangers all over, like wherever you go, they support. This is a nice thing that you're doing. Oh, it's so nice. I wish. But for mothers, for instance, when they go into the public, for instance, a child is crying because everyone is exhausted. People are asking, oh, for instance, she's a bad mother, or like this negative criticism. So this is the kind of privilege that, for instance, I've learned and I've experienced throughout my time as a dad.
If I may, Patrick, one thing I like to ask here, because we're just talking to our friends, our family, relatives, everybody, people who don't necessarily deal with technical jargon of self-development, but everyone understands gains and losses. And I think when you're talking about privileges, one of the things is that nobody in their right mind wants to be in a disadvantaged position. Nobody just wants to lose time, lose money, lose resources, lose space. We don't want to lose. And I think that maybe therein lies the difficulty to see, if I change my perspective, if I shift my perspective, as you're saying, what is it in there for me? For me, I'm talking about men who already feel like, maybe my position is not perfect, but it serves me. It suits me the way it is. And if I lose one more thing, then I'll go into a disadvantage. So if you were to put it in like simple terms, in terms of losses and gains and benefits, how would you maybe share your view that, for example, sharing time with your child is a privilege, and not necessarily sleeping 8 hours when they are newborns, for example? I don't know. Maybe.
Yeah, I like the pragmatic way you put it. Like, what is it in for me? Like, that's the question. Yeah. No, I think it's not only like as a father, but as a human. I think like allowing us for connections, like, will open like endless possibilities. So that should be like the number one. Like connecting more to your children at young age, it opens like endless possibilities. And what I mean about these possibilities, in how you communicate to them, how you live with them, how you engage with them, how you play with them, even like topics as discipline, how easily you discipline them, and even easier things. Like I was telling, the first trip I did to Mozambique with my son, to come from Grenada to Maputo, it takes more than 30 hours. So he was 3 years old, and we took this journey from Grenada to Mozambique and back with a 3 years boy, just the two of us. I think like if I didn't go like through the experience that we went at early age, that trip would have been very stressful for both of us, but we had fun all the time, fun. So this is the kind of like practical possibilities that I want to bring to you. And at the same time, sometimes we take things as granted. You don't know about tomorrow. You might end up like being single home like parents. So what do you do? If you are not there, you don't know how to relate, you don't know, you are not a functional parent, as a fully functional parent, as I would like to put it. What do? You have to go like through stress. And it's not only being like a single home parenting, if you are in a situation where you have to be with your children for a really long time, only you and your kids, like, how do you operate? How do you function? So these are like the kind of what is in for me. But most important for me, like, it's the connection, the deep connections the human connections are very complex and very difficult for our minds to even to put in words. So there are some things that are very at a level that we don't understand and we don't see, but it doesn't mean they don't exist. You know, they're there. And by connecting is a way to explore like those uncharted like territories. Maybe we didn't have them. I would, for instance, when I started, I mentioned, and don't take me wrong, my father is a hero for me, but I didn't have a chance to hug him, you know, as often as I wanted. Like I was having a conversation with the other day with my brother, and we were trying to find like moments that where we did give like a hug to my dad, and it was very few. And there's nothing like more how can I say deep, like as a hug, like when you give like a true hug. Like I've been teaching my kids like to hug at a very young age, and they're huggers now. So there's a lot there, even things that we don't understand, our human brain don't understand now. And you know, you and Tina, you work like in that area in terms of like, there are a lot of things that our eyes don't see, you know, they go beyond our understanding, but they're there, you know, they're there, and we can explore that.
I think you already also mentioned what people are losing, or men are losing, or people in general, because we connect with everybody in a way or another, or we don't connect with everybody because of this. But the possibility of having a real deep human connection with our own fathers, with our own children, for those of you who have children. I have my how can I say, spiritual children in a way, not not biologic, but not being able to feel that, I think also contributes to leaving a void in our lives that we try to fill in so many ways that are not possible without the human connection. Like we try to fill that space with other things, and it doesn't get ever filled, that position of human connection. So that's what we're losing.
It's so interesting what you're all saying. It just takes me back to this context again of Mozambique. One of the things that happens often here also is that when a man doesn't have, for some reason, he is unemployed, let's say he's not working a full-time job, he doesn't have a small business, and he's staying at home. There is a lot of judgment about that, you know, in the world of women, and probably also in the world of men, but mostly in the world of women. And I find that because these experiences of connecting with your children, playing with the children are not popular, you know, and they are not promoted, there's a loss. So this man is at home and the kids come back from school. He's not going anywhere. That's a time he could be using to support his kids with homework, with supporting them with other, you know, moral and, you know, cultural, whatever it is, education, because he's at home. But for him, it's a source of shame. It's a source of guilt that his kids come back and he's at home. I remember the story of, you know, there was a time when my brother was working from home, and it was weird for the kids because my sister-in-law went to the office and my brother worked from home, and for the kids were like, something is wrong here, you know, like, why does dad stay at home and mom goes to the office? And this creates, because of the expectations and because of what's heard outside, it creates this this gap, you know. I don't know if we can call it a gap, I mean, it's lack of a better word, but it takes away the opportunity for this human connection between fathers and their children, and fathers and their partners, because you can't show your availability in that level. You can't show your availability emotionally or physically. You have to pretend that you are busy, even if it means that you leave in the morning and you come back in the afternoon and you spend the whole day in the barracas drinking. But you have to show that you are busy. Your kids cannot see you just staying at home, you know. So there's a lost opportunity there, you know, for a lot of fathers who are unemployed. There's a lost opportunity to say, okay, since I'm not working right now, how can I contribute to the growth and development of my family by supporting the children, by supporting my wife. But that's actually condemned. That is not seen well by women. It's not seen well by men in our cultures. I just wanted to comment on that.
No, Tina, that's a pure, even for me as well. For instance, it was a little bit difficult, for instance, to share like with,
Just
things, yes, like because it was not only staying at home, as you mentioned, like then you have chores, you have like, you have to clean, you have to, it's a lot of work. So once we started putting like a lot of value on that work, because that's what makes us like who we are. Once you start like putting some value on that, not only the fact that you have to go and have a salary, have a work, but then taking care of kids, taking care of a house, which is, it's our space, which we want to, and we have to put value on that. And it shouldn't be, unfortunately, as you mentioned, it's a shame. And we go back to the social values and the cultural traditional values. And this is where I think the shift is. It's a lot, first of all, like it's a lot of, I didn't realize that, and I have to be honest with you as well, because I didn't realize how much it takes to take care of kids, number one. And at the same time, you have to take care of the house. You have to clean up, you have, to organize the house, you have to cook, you have to prepare everything, you do the laundry. It's a lot of work. At the end of the day, you are exhausted. And as I mentioned, then you have the night shift, the baby's crying at the beginning. And this is a lot of work that I think it's globally, like we don't put a lot of value. People will respect you if you have a good work with big salary, with a big car, and that. But there is a lot of work, and we should start like changing how we see taking care of kids and taking care of the household.
You mentioned the global concept. Do you see a lot of difference between because coming from Rwanda, growing up in Mozambique, at least part of it, and now in Grenada, do you see a lot of differences or similarities between these countries and like the roles of men, the roles of women, the roles of fathers, the roles of mothers? Or also, do you have an example of a situation, a place, an environment where things are different that could inspire us? Maybe just to remind you, we once in our masculinity circle, you mentioned in African people that where the father also, in a way, breastfeeds the child and takes care of the child. So maybe if you can give us an example that would be like some fresh air for us to refresh our minds and our views and our perspectives on life.
Yes. There is a small community in the middle of Congo Basin, in the tropical forest of Basin. They are pygmies, I don't know how to call them. So it's considered the most equal society in the world, because men and women, they have basically the same roles. That's why they don't breastfeed, the men don't breastfeed, they use them just a way to calm down the baby. So they put them in their chest and they will be there like, not breastfeeding, it's more a way to, it's the most equal, you can Google that, it's the most equal society, it was considered the most equal society. As you mentioned, I think the topic of like masculinity is quite a global topic, like it's a global issue. You see it like in any society, like don't get wrong, like everywhere, at least in countries that I've seen that is being an issue. Of course, you have like societies that are advancing like differently, like compared to others. And as you mentioned, it's not something that is from yesterday. I think they started like some way ago, and it's all about like, as I mentioned, what you pass on to your kids, and then it will pass on to their kids, and for the future generation, and so on and so forth. Yes, I've seen, as I mentioned to you, for instance, when I was a stay-home dad, there was a group of stay-home dad where I'm here in Grenada, and there will be like some kind of support. There will be like this dad's dates, so we'll take the kids out, and so and you have people talking like about it. You have forums, the same thing that you're doing, which I'll have to commend you, Akshar, as well, like having a group of men talking about their experiences. Sometimes it's more about like being able to share your experience with and learn from other people as well. So I see like a movement, like as you mentioned, this is a kind of like a small group, but I think like over time it will change, because people will see the benefit of it. For instance, yes, a few days ago I was discussing with my brother about meditation and kids at a young age, and he was telling me something like if like all men had a chance to meditate like throughout their lives, maybe we'll have like the level of violence that we have like in this world.
Yeah.
So starting like this kind of conversations, like not only like parents, but those who are aspiring to be parents, wanting to learn a little bit more. I always say before like being a parent, try to learn about yourself, start some kind of self-development pathway. Yeah, so it's a matter of creating like these cycles and multiply them. And I'm quite sure like in some years we'll have like more people joining here and listening to us. Yeah, we go back to the topic of small steps.
Yeah, actually, when you were talking about the groups, the fathers, who support each other, I was thinking, it's so common in the, I would say mostly in the big cities, in Mozambique, which is quite interesting. In the north of Mozambique, it's very common to see men with their children in the health clinics, especially in Nampula, in Zambezia, very common. You can go to a health clinic. It's not a foreign concept, but coming to the south is more challenging. What I was thinking when you were talking about men supporting each other in this journey, I was thinking how easy for men. I see often that men here, they they create little cultural practices. Like you see men who ride bicycles together, or men who suddenly now they are doing this scooter things, what if the same movement that they can create easily about fun, they can also start creating about being parents, about being fathers of girls, about being fathers of boys, you know what I mean? Because it's easy for men to come together, but what if they start using these spaces, which are easy for them to create, to talk about these topics? Because let me tell you, we do need the men in our lives, as fathers, as brothers, as husbands. And women are not even the women who are feminists, we are not against men. And we do see, and it is an expectation that we have, to be truthful, it is an expectation that we have, that we can receive support and be understood and be heard, as women. But if men are not given the opportunity to develop the capacity to relate to their feelings, express their feelings, it'll be hard for them to connect with women, in any capacity and under any circumstances, at work, with their co-workers, with their, wives, with their sisters, whatever. Because if you didn't learn how to relate to your emotions, and if that is not allowed amongst your friends, then that it actually distances us even more, and we need each other, we need each other. And human connection, like you said, and very truthfully, is about emotions. We can only connect when we allow ourselves to feel, and have empathy for each other. But you can only have empathy for each other if we allow ourselves to feel, so that's really interesting.
Yeah, I want to say something about that, because I think like culturally, like in some, particularly like in African societies, we have the vehicles for that, because it's typical, like, for instance, if you go to the villages, if you mentioned about like men coming together to ride bicycles, to do things, we usually do that. We're good at doing that, you know. If you go to the village, you will have a group of men, you know, they're talking about things. So we have the platforms. It's just to take the message there, you know, these things start being discussed. In our society, we have vehicles for that, you know. It's very typical to see on Fridays, you go like in the bars, like in Maputo, in the Baracas, you see men sitting, like talking about like different issues. Saturdays, they go together, play football, they go to the beach, they're doing that. So they always, you know, we have the platforms already, and it's in our culture, you know, sitting and talking about like different issues. It's just, I think, a situation on bringing like, you know, the message like to these different like social cycles that we already have.
Yeah, definitely. We see people are making comments on Facebook. It's so good. Thank you, Cheryl Miller. Thank you, Anna Karina, for your comments. I just want to bring some of the comments that are on Facebook. Cheryl speaks about the workforce tries to define manhood, but what they do in the workplace rather than the great and divine spirit man that they also embody. She says, in the US, our society demonizes the man who wants to contribute in a positive way, and they're held back. You know, so I love this. So it's not only about Mozambique, she's actually talking about what's happening in the US. And then Anna Karina also talks about having a conversation, having been called to have a conversation with her son about fatherhood and about manhood after listening to a song by Kendrick Lamar called Father Time, where he talks about daddy's issues, where boys learn from their fathers how to behave, not cry, always provide, be strong. So yeah,
Awesome.
this is quite a necessary conversation, and it's an urgent conversation because we need each other. I just want to put, sometimes my technicalities, I just hear sounds from everywhere. So
and
go ahead.
Yeah, and yeah, you for instance, you brought the issue, for instance, in the US. I think like, I don't know, from the little that I've experienced as well, then you have, for instance, in societies where, for instance, race is another problem, an issue. For instance, being a Black father as well can be, there's a lot of misconceptions about, like, you know, being a Black father. So for instance, we are supposed to abandon our kids and, you know, go. So there are a lot of misconceptions that, depending on, like, you know, where you live, that makes like this conversation a little bit more difficult.
Yeah, true.
Definitely. Yeah. Thank you so much. We don't see questions from people on the chat box. I saw you saying thank you, Nivaldo. Was there something that you wanted to share that Nivaldo shared? Akshat?
Yeah, he just said I like the topic and the conversation. Unfortunately, I have to leave. I hope these conversations continue. Now I see that he sent it as a direct message, like private message. Maybe speak. Yeah. See you next time.
Yeah, we definitely need to have this conversation also in Portuguese, and we will create that space. There's one question. Okay, so this is the format of this Papus live, this live chats, is that the last guest will leave a question for the next guest. Okay. But before I put it on or bring up that question, I wanted to again thank you, Patrick, for sparing this time to have this conversation with us. The more we talk about this, the more we can start, you know, really nurturing these human connections. We as women need to learn about men. I don't think we do. Even I, as a mom, every day I'm surprised by what my sons are teaching me, you know, and I definitely see myself sometimes operating from that place of patriarchy, of expecting them to be some kind of way because of what I saw at home with my brothers, with my father, and what I saw, you know, even in my relationships with men in other spheres of society. And so I really want to thank you for allowing yourself to have this conversation, and even for being that beacon of light, an example, a reference point for those men who perhaps are willing, but are afraid, you know, and so when they can see someone doing it, it really encourages them to try, and then see. I will often say you must try, and if nobody dies, it means you can do it, you know.
Yeah.
So we have a question that was left by our last guest, and it's probably a little bit off the topic, but you can also find connections. And the question is, in that conversation, we were talking about being yourself, and you know, and authenticity, and being, you know, and probably connects with what you're talking about today. And the question that she left was, to what extent do we humiliate ourselves, or to what extent can we, or should we humiliate ourselves in order to satisfy the needs of others? That was the question she left.
Wow, that's it. Yeah, that's an interesting question. I think that living in a society, of course, we always say like we want to be authentic, but my authenticity like has limits like towards like, let's say, where I live, you know. It's not about humiliating ourselves. And if you put in yourself, we shouldn't put ourselves in a position where we have to humiliate ourselves. So that's a no-go. Like, you know, if you think that you are humiliating yourself, that's a space that you shouldn't be, and you should try to change something like that. But when you talk about being authentic, I'm aware that I live like in a context, you know. I can be authentic in my house. The level of authenticity, like, it will depend where I am, because I don't live in an isolation. So it's not about humiliating myself, but sometimes like giving up, you know, and respect some. For instance, I can be frustrated in the morning, you know, when leaving home because something happened at home, but doesn't allow me to get at work and yelling at everyone, even if that's something that I want to do, you know. So this is what I'm trying to make. We can be authentic, but we have to always see the context. And yeah. I think if being authentic, you feel humiliated, then that's not a space that you should be, you know. But it's very important to bear in mind that yes, you have to be authentic, but it has to be in a context. You know, you can't be authentic all the time. You can't, you know, you can get excited, like for instance in a work, but you don't. Yeah, you can get excited getting a message at church. You look at it, but you don't. You know, it doesn't give you the right to raise and, you know, start jumping like in a funeral. Like you can get a message that transmits excitement, but you don't raise and dance like in a funeral. There is, you know, that's what I just want to make.
Yeah, thank you. Actually, I'm going to give it over to you because you're very good at bringing out the nuggets, summarize the nuggets of the conversation before we close.
All right. No, I've had so much fun, and I knew I would, because with the two of you individually and also together, it's always so fun and so nice and so heartwarming. I really love you guys. Yeah, like maybe to summarize, someone just logged in and is just watching the video now, or just wants to have the final ideas. From what I got, it started with Patrick saying that his journey of being a person, of being a father, of being a man that is working on himself, that is continuously open for learning, is questioning. So this is a key word for, I think, most of the processes that when we want to do things better and want to do things in a different way and want to make ourselves and our world better, we have to question everything that we thought was true and all of those things. I think one thing that was also very important that was discussed here is the fact that being vulnerable is not the same as being weak. That we have feelings, and they're here for a purpose. And the more we learn how to express them in different ways, in creative ways, the better it is for everybody. Now, for men, for women, for everybody, it is better. Because as of now, if men can only express all different sorts of emotions through anger, through violence, this is what's making us sick. as a species, as a race, human race. We've seen that there are a lot of benefits in just being ourselves and expressing what we feel as men as well, and that it's a matter of shifting perspective. It's a matter of start giving value to things that are valuable, that maybe we don't see them as valuable yet. For instance, human connections. Why can be more valuable than that? Why are we here for in the first place? And also, Patrick really highlighted the fact that we maybe will not see the change all at once, but the importance of small steps that he's taking, that I'm taking, that Tina is taking, that people who are here with us today or will be watching us in the future are also taking, and that we should continue to take those small steps. So maybe those are some of the things that I was mentally and registering. Let's keep doing what we're doing. The way things are now, generally speaking, are not ideal. Now we are living in a desert of connections, of emotions. Children are losing the opportunity of spending real valuable time with their fathers, and by consequence, many of the ex-children, they become the new fathers who also don't connect with their children and so on. But if we're taking small steps, not only are we changing the narrative, as you said, Tina, changing this narrative, changing the way things were that do not longer serve, and also inspiring others to do the same, even if it seems like change is not coming as quick enough. It is coming. No? Maybe that's what I took out of this beautiful conversation.
Thank you. Thank you, Akshar, and thank you, Patrick. Patrick, could you also leave a question, and it could be based on this conversation, leave a question for our next guest.
Okay, you have a topic, or it can be like any questions?
Anything.
Okay, maybe I will go to the topic of parenting and personal development. And I will say, like, what do we need to foster personal development, to look at ourselves individually? What do we need? What kind of tools do we need? So I know it's a broad question, but this is something that I've been asking yourself. Do we wait like till you are parents to start like looking at yourself? And at what point we should start it as well? At what point like this personal development and looking like inside ourselves, learning ourselves should start,
Yeah.
So.
Thank you. This connects very well. It just so clicks very well with what we're going to be talking with our next guest. It's just divine timing and divine questioning. Thank you so much.
Thank you for having me, and it was a pleasure. And thank you, Aksha, for the invitation. Thank you, Tina, for having me in your show.
Thank you. Have a wonderful week, everyone. And thank you, everybody who joined us. I just wanted to remind you that we have, Akshar has a podcast called Fica Zen with Akshar, Com Akshar. It's a really great, it brings people from all over, different professions, different experiences, different backgrounds. And he has really open conversations with people. I'm inviting anyone who wants to listen to them to go over to Akshar's page on YouTube and on Instagram as well, and connect to the podcast, Be Zen with Akshar. We are Temba Life and Tree of Life, and thank you so much for joining us. Bye.
Bye-bye. Thanks so much.